Bonjour, bonne année, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Je suis Boris Proulx, journaliste au Devoir et je serai le modérateur de cette conférence de presse aujourd'hui. Hi, welcome to all. I'm Boris Proulx, reporter for Le Devoir and Vice President of the National Press Gallery, and I'll be moderating this press conference. Before we begin, just a little reminder, if you are to use the little earpieces, just be mindful not to use... No, apparently the mic is working. The mic is on. I don't know if you can hear me. So if you're in the room and you are using the little earpieces, just be mindful not to put them anywhere close to the mic, not to hurt our friends, interpreters, please. Welcome to this press conference. We have on the stage here Marc Miller, ministre de l'Immigration, des Réfugiés et de la Citoyenneté. David McGuinty, ministre de la Sécurité publique. Nous avons aussi deux responsables gouvernementaux, Erin O'Gorman de l'Agence des services frontaliers du Canada ainsi que Brian Larkin de la GRC. Nous allons, les ministres vont faire une brève déclaration en entrée, puis on va passer à la séance de questions-réponses. On va prendre d'abord les questions dans la salle, et puis si on a le temps, nous allons aller sur Zoom. On that, ministers, you have the floor.
Good. Is the microphone on? Ça fonctionne?
Ça fonctionne. On dit que ça fonctionne.
Ça fonctionne. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for joining us. Now that the introductions have been done, I wanted to make a few opening remarks as Canada's new Minister of Public Safety. The border between Canada and the United States is the most secure and well-managed border in the world. It facilitates trade and travel while preventing illegal migration and threats to the security of both countries, including fentanyl and other drugs. That's thanks to the tireless and dedicated law enforcement partners on both sides of the border who work together day in and day out to keep both countries safe. At 1,200 ports of entry. In Canada, 8,500 frontline personnel are preventing illegal goods and inadmissible people from entering Canada. Grâce à notre collaboration, l'année dernière, des échanges commerciaux d'une valeur de près de 3,6 milliards de dollars et environ 400 000 personnes ont traversé la frontière canado-américaine. La semaine dernière, je me suis rendu au point d'entrée de Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle en compagnie du ministre de la Sécurité du public, François Bonnardel, pour rencontrer directement les agents frontaliers de première ligne de l'ASFC qui font le travail sur le terrain pour protéger notre frontière. In British Columbia this week, I've just returned having met with the RCMP's Marine Border Enforcement Team and visited the Border Integrity Operations Center. Through joint efforts from Canada and the United States, less than 1% of the illegal drugs and crossings into the United States came from Canada. We have a strong border, and we are building a stronger one, an interconnected system to keep each other safe. And nowhere is this more apparent than Canada's firefighters assisting American crews fighting the worst wildfires Los Angeles has ever seen. Canada and the United States have a long, mutually beneficial relationship that keeps our economies strong and our people safe. This hasn't changed at all. To keep it that way, we must always work to maintain and improve that relationship. And when it comes to border security, we are tackling the flow of illegal drugs, guns, and irregular migration. At the federal level, we have been absolutely committed to working with all provinces and territories as we meet these challenges head-on for both Canada and the United States. I'd like to sincerely thank our provincial and territorial partners who are working hard to provide additional assistance to defend Canada's border under our Team Canada approach, especially Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, who have stepped up. And to the incredible businesses who are working with us, thank you also for your outreach and engagement with your American counterparts. We must work together to protect our people, our jobs, and our economy. Last month, our government presented a comprehensive border plan to bolster the security of our shared border and further increase the level of collaboration with our American counterparts. That border plan invests $1.3 billion to further strengthen our border security with more personnel, more tools, advanced technology, drones, surveillance equipment, and helicopters. These investments are already helping to enhance Canada's border surveillance. Let me highlight some of the key measures we have already taken. As of December 23rd, we ended the practice of flagpoling, which occurred when foreign nationals left Canada for a short time, only to re-enter Canada to access immigration services more quickly. Ending this practice will allow border officers to fully concentrate on border enforcement, saving 8,000 days of work for border agents. We've deployed 60 new drones along our border with the United States, and we will be deploying additional surveillance towers. We are acquiring new technology, such as X-rays, mobile X-rays, and handheld chemical analyzers. As of this week, we are deploying new helicopters at the Canada-U.S. border. These will help us to further enhance our border surveillance and our intelligence operations, again with our American partners. As further proof of our strong relationship with the United States, Canada is launching the first ever pre-clearance operation in the U.S. at Cannon Corners, New York, which I visited last week. With this operation, we'll be the first country to establish pre-clearance on U.S. soil, where Canadian Border Services officers will work at a shared facility alongside U.S. officers. To minimize the number of individuals trying to cross the border illegally between ports of entry and to keep dangerous individuals out of North America, we've increased the CBSA and RCMP's surge capacity. Last year, the CBSA removed over 16,800 individuals from Canada. That's more than double compared to 2021. Through our border plan, we're investing additional resources to further increase removals by another 25% this year. As of January 6th, the CBSA adjusted its hours of service at land ports of entry to align with those of the United States. This will allow both countries to use our resources more efficiently, as we'll be able to deploy officers to busier ports of entry when required. Au cours des 2 dernières semaines, notre gouvernement et celui de chaque province et territoire ont également organisé des exercices de planification très réussis pour se préparer à toute éventualité à la frontière. The CBSA is our country's first line of defense to stop illegal drugs and precursor chemicals from entering and exiting Canada. The RCMP also continues its efforts to detect, to investigate, and to disrupt criminal threats by targeting transnational and serious organized crime groups involved in the production and the trafficking of illegal substances, including opioids. To ensure law and border enforcement have the tools they need to detect and address fentanyl and its precursors, a huge challenge for this country and the United States, we've invested $77.7 million to expand Health Canada's laboratory and regulatory capabilities. These measures I've just outlined are the steps we have taken just as of late. We will continue to work with our American partners to ensure that our border is the most secure and efficient in the world. The foundation of the Canada-U.S. relationship is strong, and Canada looks forward to continuing our work with our neighbors and our partners. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Minister Miller.
Thanks, David. Over the last year, we've taken a series of actions to reinforce the integrity of our immigration system and programs contributing to the collective effort to ensure public safety and the orderly management of the shared border with the U.S. Les mesures qu'on a prises ont déjà et continuent d'avoir un impact mesurable sur la gestion de nos programmes d'immigration. Évidemment, le renforcement de la sécurité nationale est un moment critique pour notre pays, et évidemment nos voisins du Sud. Le Canadien et les États-Unis, ça va sans dire, entretiennent des liens étroits entre personnes et un partenariat économique puissant basé sur la circulation sécurisée des biens et des personnes à travers nos frontières. Ce partenariat soutient des millions d'emplois et des familles des deux côtés de la frontière. Both countries recognize and agree that a robust, well-managed immigration system is essential to building a safer, stronger North American perimeter. A well-managed immigration system doesn't mean the government is abandoning our quintessentially Canadian values. It's actually quite the contrary. These values depend on a well-managed system that bolsters that integrity that people can trust. And Canadians can also trust that immigration remains central to our national identity and critical to our well-being, as well as our long-term prosperity. That being said, there's no question that an increased migration of different natures has led to significant rise in the number of people seeking asylum in safe countries like Canada, one of the safest, if not the safest in the world. And despite having the best immigration and refugee system in the world, it's been a challenge to keep up. Unfortunately, it's also caused more bad actors to come out of the shadows looking to exploit those who are at their most vulnerable as they take a very difficult decision to move to another country and to profit over those seeking a better life. In response, we've taken decisive steps throughout the last year to strengthen our asylum system, including proposing new consequences for those who try to exploit it. Canada and the U.S. have a long history of collaborating to uphold the integrity of our respective systems. That means, first and foremost, working together. Rappelez-vous qu'au début de l'année 2023, nous avons franchi une étape importante en fermant le passage irrégulier du chemin Roxham et en élargissant notre entente sur les tiers pays sûrs pour qu'elle s'applique à l'ensemble de notre frontière terrestre, y compris les voies navigables internes. Cette action a eu un impact très significatif, réduisant le nombre de demandes d'asile de personnes traversant illégalement la frontière canadienne d'une moyenne de 165 personnes par jour à 12. En février dernier, en réponse à une nette augmentation des abus de notre système d'asile, comme en témoigne le nombre croissant de demandes de réfugiés, refusées, retirées ou abandonnées, nous avons mis en place une exigence partielle de visa pour les ressortissants mexicains. Depuis lors, les demandes d'asile de citoyens mexicains dans nos aéroports ont chuté de 97% par rapport à 2023. In January, after finding significant evidence of patterns of abuse in our visitor visas, we put in place new measures to detect fraud. And since then, we've made and seen a major reduction in the number of asylum claims from people who've been issued temporary resident visas. And visa refusals are also up by more than 61% with countries where we spotted the highest levels of abuse. You've been distributed a number of charts that evidence that in a more graphic way. You can do with those what you will, but there's a number of important data points we think are significant that chart the course of the progress that's been achieved over the last year. Nous mettons également en place de nouvelles réglementations pour empêcher les personnes de conseiller aux autres d'abuser de notre système pour sanctionner rapidement ceux qui tentent de le faire. Alors que la plupart des consultants en immigration et en citoyenneté respectent des normes professionnelles élevées, certains fournissent des conseils rémunérés sans autorisation ou encouragent les gens à se présenter de manière trompeuse. De nouvelles réglementations donneront plus de pouvoir à IRCC et au Collège des consultants en immigration et citoyenneté pour prendre des mesures plus strictes contre ces individus. À titre d'exemple, nous proposons des sanctions pécuniaires pouvant atteindre 1,5 million de dollars, ainsi que d'autres conséquences telles que la publication des noms de mauvais acteurs sur notre site Web. Together, these actions not only enhance Canada's ability to manage those who enter the country, but also strengthen border security. They've also proven effective at protecting the Canada-U.S. border from irregular southbound crossings. After we imposed the partial visa requirement that I mentioned earlier for Mexican nationals, we've seen a rapid decline in Canada being used as a backdoor into the U.S. A number of the Mexican nationals intercepted while trying to cross illegally has fallen by 72% since June alone. I can also report that our heightened scrutiny of visitor visa applications has led to an 89% overall reduction in foreign nationals crossing illegally into the United States over that same period. And since launching our system to verify every study permit application that corresponds with an authentic letter of acceptance, which has been a challenge over the last year from an accredited post-secondary learning institution, we've seen a 91% drop in legal U.S. crossings by those holding Canadian study permits. Puis récemment, comme l'a mentionné David, nous avons mis fin à la pratique dite des allers-retours à la frontière tour du poteau. C'est lorsque les ressortissants étrangers quittent le Canada et y retournent immédiatement à une frontière terrestre afin de bénéficier des services d'immigration le jour même, au lieu de faire une demande en bonne et due forme à l'intérieur du pays et d'attendre leur tour. Les allers-retours à la frontière ont utilisé des ressources précieuses et ont éloigné les agents canadiens et américains de tâches d'application plus critiques. L'exemple donné par David, que ça libère 8000 jours de travail, c'est l'équivalent d'une personne qui travaille très fort pendant 20 ans à peu près, donc c'est pas rien. Ces changements contribuent à prévenir les abus et à faciliter la circulation légale des personnes, des services, des biens à travers nos frontières sur lesquelles nos pays comptent. Similarly, the flow of information between countries is also crucial to a safe and orderly migration, adding to our existing processes of sharing relevant data on foreign nationals applying to immigrate to either country. We've extended our information sharing agreement with the Americans and will now share immigration-related information on permanent residents in both Canada and the U.S. This information is really mission critical to having a safe border. And by granting this extensions, both countries are better equipped to screen applicants and make informed migration decisions and also prevent fraud. Nous continuons de constater les effets déstabilisants de la désinformation à travers le monde. C'est pourquoi nos programmes doivent être couronnés de succès pour que les nouveaux arrivants qui viennent ici puissent réussir. C'est pourquoi les campagnes publicitaires de cette année visent à informer spécifiquement les nouveaux arrivants potentiels sur les permis d'études internationaux et la demande d'asile, évidemment la difficulté qui y sont reliées. The bottom line is that we've taken steps and taken measures that we're implementing and they're working. There are clear signs of that: reduced southbound apprehensions, fewer asylum claims, less fraud and abuse. This is concrete, important progress. Évidemment, ce travail n'est pas nouveau, il a persisté tout au long de nombreuses administrations, que ce soit les Américains ou les 9 ans que nous sommes au pouvoir. I generally believe in our ability to continue working with the incoming administration because the fact is that this collaboration is in the shared interests of both Canadians and Americans. On that, thank you, and both David and I are happy to take your questions.
Merci, thank you. We'll now go to the floor, and if you are attending this press conference on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this time, and I can recognize you later on. Si vous êtes sur Zoom, vous pouvez utiliser la fonction lever la main maintenant, et je vais vous donner la parole ensuite. Let's start with Judy Trin, CTV.
Thank you, Ministers. I'm curious to know about your ability to detain illegal people who cross illegally while you process them. What is that capacity at? And if you could also elaborate, we know that in terms of the U.S. figures, nearly 20,000 migrants from Canada have tried to cross into the U.S. How many are the Americans sending back to us? I'm curious to know if that process happens and if that's also adding to our responsibility to detain and process.
Maybe I'll ask Erin.
Sure. Can you hear me? So when people cross irregularly in between the ports of entry and they are intercepted and brought to CBSA, we process them in accordance with the Safe Third Country Agreement, and we return them immediately. So we will use, we have very short-term detention if we're in the middle of the night or it's taking a little bit longer, but we have the capacity to hold people while we process them pending their return to the U.S.
Are the Americans sending any individuals back to us as per that safe third country if they arrived in Canada first? Has that been happening?
So every day, CBSA and our counterpart organization, CBP, implement the Safe Third Country Agreement, which is to say if people cross irregularly or at ports of entry and they don't qualify for one of the exceptions, they're returned to the country that they come from, and we do that every day.
I'm asking for numbers, though, and whether or not there's been an increase, particularly from the Americans saying, you know, we've determined they entered Canada, they came through Canada, and we are sending them back for you to deal with.
Those numbers have been decreasing, as the minister indicated. The number of southbound interceptions that are returned to us has been steadily decreasing.
But no solid numbers as to what that decrease is.
We could provide numbers. We can follow up with numbers.
Mylène Crête, La Presse.
Oui, bonjour. Vous faites le bilan là, de tout ce qui avait été, qui a été annoncé en décembre, ce qui a été fait depuis ce temps-là. L'idée, c'était de convaincre M. Trump là, d'abandonner ses tarifs. Ça ne semble pas être le cas selon les échos qu'on a. Est-ce que c'est en vain?
Ben moi, ce que j'ai dit tout au long de ça, Mylène, c'est qu'il faut toujours agir dans notre intérêt national. Et je pense que les mesures qu'on a prises en démontrent. Évidemment, avec notre relation avec les États-Unis, on veut avoir une relation qui est bonne, qui est responsable, étant donné la gestion de cette frontière la plus importante au monde en termes de flux de personnes et de biens, de flux commerciaux, relations entre nations. Donc, c'est dans notre intérêt, c'était salé, que ce soit cette administration sortante ou l'administration qui rentre dans notre intérêt national d'avoir cette saine gestion de la frontière. D'abord et avant tout. Évidemment, vous avez vu les revendications du régime qui rentre de M. Trump. Je ne pense pas qu'il faut s'attendre à une potion magique qui va être la solution absolument à tout. Je pense, étant donné le comportement ou ce qu'on a vu des énoncés publics de M. Trump, il faut que les Canadiens se préparent à 4 ans de ça et qu'on se prépare, que ce soit dans le contexte d'une frontière qui est mieux sécurisée ou dans l'imposition de tarifs et le cas échéant des mesures de rétorsion du gouvernement canadien. Je ne pense pas qu'il y a un voyage à Mar-a-Lago qui va être la réponse absolument à tout. Mais il faut continuer de travailler avec notre partenaire économique le plus important. Donc, il ne faut pas se leurrer, ce n'est pas une chose qui va être la solution à tout. Les mesures qu'on a prises, qu'on a annoncées, que je fais, que Dominique et maintenant David font, c'est des choses dans notre intérêt national qu'on se devait d'agir. Évidemment, dans le domaine de l'immigration, les mesures qu'on prennent effet genre 6 mois, 12 mois après les avoir mises en vigueur. Là. Donc, c'est du travail qui se fait depuis longtemps, bien avant l'élection de M. Trump.
If I can add to that, we have an obligation to be relentless in pursuing our relationship with the United States, and from time to time in debunking information which is not accurate. For example, the northern border represents a very small fraction of seized fentanyl. In the last year of statistics at the Canada-U.S. border, we've seen 43 pounds of fentanyl seized on the Canadian-American border. Other U.S. border areas, 21,900 pounds. The RCMP has been actively breaking up laboratories, including recently a super lab. I believe it was 93 kilograms of fentanyl. So we're going to work with a discipline and a sobriety in managing this relationship with the United States. I think what Marc is also implicitly telegraphing to Canadians is that we're not interested in drama. We're interested in making progress and showing the newly elected American government that we're serious about our border relationship, that it's integrated, that we do it together. And so we're just going to keep moving forward. And we are hopeful and remain hopeful that the new incoming administration will understand just how incredibly serious we are on this northern border.
Le ministre Bonnardel vous demande là, de sévir pour les visas qui sont autorisés pour les personnes d'origine indienne là, qui viennent au Canada. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire pour ça?
Je pense qu'il y a des preuves à l'appui qu'on a déjà sévi. Il ne s'agit pas d'un seul pays. C'est sûr qu'il y a beaucoup de volume qui vient de l'Inde. J'ai serré la vis en début d'été. Évidemment, les visas qui sont déjà émis, les gens peuvent les utiliser. Donc, comme je disais dans ma réponse précédente, les mesures qu'on met en place, ça prend quelques mois pour que ça prenne effet. Là, on voit le résultat. Par exemple, en décembre, les traversées aux États-Unis, c'est à un creux historique. Si on trace le parcours des 12 derniers mois. Donc, on a réussi, justement, en faisant des ajustements durant l'été à des visas des ressortissants de l'Inde, du Bangladesh et d'autres pays où on voyait un haut taux d'abus. Et ça a porté fruit. Là, y a-t-il lieu d'en faire plus? Oui, certainement. Il ne faut pas nécessairement nier le progrès. Puis dans les prochains mois, c'est ça sur lequel je me penche pour voir si on peut en faire plus. Je pense que les résultats vont démontrer que nous avons déjà fait depuis les 6 derniers mois un travail significatif pour vraiment aplatir cette courbe.
David Rivley, de Logic.
Thank you. My question is directed to Minister McGuinty. Many elements of the border package announced before Christmas depended on either legislative changes or appropriations from Parliament. In a best case, you could get those starting the end of March, and maybe not then. What more in the package can you do without parliamentary approval, and what's going to have to wait?
Our view is that the current circumstances in the House do not affect the implementation of the new border plan. We're moving forward. We're working with our departments. We're working with our agencies. They have assured us that we have the resources to implement this plan. They are reorienting in terms of their own internal priorities to meet the objectives of the plan. After all, what's the use of having a border plan if you don't implement it? Which is exactly what we're doing. If additional legislative measures are required, here's an idea. Why don't all political parties put the partisanship aside and come together and help us pass the legislation that we might need to strengthen this relationship? The thing about the border is it's not partisan. We don't intend to make it partisan. We're not making it partisan. We're going to give credit where credit is due. For example, if a province is moving forward in a positive way, that's a good thing. You know, a lot of people in Canada right now are very concerned. A lot of businesses are very concerned. I've had calls from business owners who have said to me, I'm worried about putting 10 families out of business, 10 families off my payroll. So our serious obligation here is to come together as a House, if we have to, and pass the legislation we may need, because the border is not partisan. There's a lot at stake.
Separate question about the helicopters. Before Christmas, the RCMP commissioner said, we're not sure where we're going to get them. You can't just go procure helicopters immediately, but you can rent them. Where do the helicopters come from?
Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thanks for the question. And so just a little bit of background, we deployed 9 helicopters already across our country. 6 of those specifically do proactive patrols in various parts of the country. And what we've been able to do is actually secure 2 helicopters through a lease, through a local aviation company in Ottawa. So we've been able to expedite and use current government procurement processes to expedite that. And we anticipate that those 2 helicopters will be active and ready to commence proactive patrols supporting border operations on January 17th. So we'll have, again, our fleet will increase. Our goal is to actually add another 2 helicopters, but again, as Commissioner Duhem alluded to, there are procurement and mechanics to get those things moving forward, but we're really pleased with the progress and can confirm that 2 additional helicopters will be live on January 17th.
Chris Nardi, the National Post.
The first question, Minister Miller. So you mentioned that I'm assuming from the fact that you talked about the information sharing that deal is now kicked in, that the diplomatic ties, the diplomatic cables have been exchanged. Why did you sign that deal very secretly in July when no one knew about it? No immigration lawyer, no one. Why do it back in July? Why not say anything? And what's the need to add millions of permanent residents to this deal to automatically share their information with the U.S.?
Yeah, look, nothing secret about it. I signed it at the U.S. Embassy with Ambassador Cohen in July. We agreed that we had to table this in front. It's been tabled in Parliament, I think, since the fall, if I recall correctly, so available. I think we saw it mostly as an operational adjustment. It's something I think is important, sharing information on permanent residents traveling across the border allows for a managed flow of information on both sides. They do the same for us, so we get to do security assessments and whatever assessment that we need to do on a person coming in. So I think it was in our mutual interest. I think number of reasons. Why didn't I do a press conference after having signed what I think is a bit of a essentially a bit of a nerdy agreement on like what data gets shared with the U.S. for controlled migration flow?
A lot of people.
Yeah, sure, but I think if people want to travel the border, the welcoming country needs to have the expectation that they can get a sense of whether that person is traveling the border for the reasons that they're doing that. And we thought it was rational in our own interest with respect to Americans, which come in a significant flow, to get information on their permanent residents and vice versa. So the right thing to do, we tabled it in Parliament and thought it appropriate to talk about it in the context of other measures that we are taking, for example, the ones that we are taking currently. I think a lot of people have accused this government of doing press conferences sometimes about things that are minor in nature. I think it's important when we talk about messaging and communicating to the public that we pick our moments and that we're judicious in the material things that we think are important to the Canadian public. This is important, but as part of another set of measures in securing the border that has been in the current administration's interest, but also in our administration's interest.
And, just to follow up to both ministers, leadership race is about to be launched, or is launched, but...
we're running today, David
yeah,
and I are doing
that's what
joint.
I thought, too. I was looking at it.
We'll be joint.
Actually, I thought it was Miss O'Gorman, quite frankly.
The co-prime ministers. We're appealing to the over 50 male electorate that we need
but
to go.
I am curious, though, have you chosen a horse for this race, either of you? Who would you support in this leadership race?
So I'm not going to speak publicly about who I support. I, like many members of the Liberal Party, will be looking at the policies and what they propose to give a fresh vision of the Liberal Party, and I'll personally be looking at the person who is best to fight Pierre Poilievre's toxic messaging that I think is very dangerous for a lot of Canadians. So there's a slate of candidates out there. I think everyone knows Chrystia Freeland. I think we should give Canadians and Liberal Party members the opportunity to evaluate her on her merits. She's tested, battle tested, so people can judge accordingly. Mark Carney, who's rumored to announce, has a very solid background in the private sector, so people can see the attractiveness. He's a goalie like me. So, don't bet against a goalie, but obviously you want to see whether he can do the butterfly or whether he can flash some glove or what he does to a guy that sits in his crease. Can he crack him in the legs a bit? And I think, you want to see someone that's battle tested. Karina Gold, great colleague who's been really positive in Parliament. She's a bit younger, so I think that's an appeal to some members of the party. And I've been good friends with Frank Baylis as a colleague, so I wish them all good luck. But I think for Liberal members, it's an important opportunity to look at what the policies are and focus on the policies, and our ability not only to win a leadership race, but to take it into the next election with a unified team that we haven't been over the last little while. It's showed in the polls. I don't think that. That's something that goes away with the departure of the Prime Minister. This is something that, if we're not unified as a party, then Canadians will see that. So I expect this as an opportunity for us to unify as a party, and that'll be my message to folks when they ask me. I don't know, David.
I just want to begin by making a correction. Between 2018 and 2024, Canadian law enforcement disrupted and dismantled 44 lab sites tied to illicit fentanyl, and the most recent very big bust that the RCMP pulled off was a super lab with 95 million doses of fentanyl. This is a very big haul and a very, very important moment for Canada. Look, this question of leadership and our responsibilities right now vis-a-vis the United States, for me, is perhaps more circumscribed. What I want Canadians to know is that it is possible for this democracy to have a party, and a party in power, conduct a leadership race while running a government. My efforts are entirely focused on trying to make sure that we meet our obligations vis-a-vis an incoming American presidential administration. That's what I am focused on. We're looking at practical measures to implement on a daily, weekly basis. We're spending a lot of time communicating now through our operational folks and official folks with our counterparts in the United States. We're working with our provincial counterparts, big city mayors, business leaders. I think that's, for me, where I'm focusing 100% of my time. In the question of leadership, the leadership will take its course. I am watching it. I'm encouraging all my colleagues, but I think it's important for Canadians to know we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And the leadership is an important function of our democracy. But this business right now of the Canada-U.S. relationship is paramount. It's a new landscape. We haven't seen this in a while. It's not unfamiliar to governments, but it's one we've got to get right as we manage this relationship going forward.
Émilie Bergeron, Presse canadienne.
Oui, bonjour. Ici. Oui, bonjour. Monsieur Trump a insisté dernièrement sur le déficit commercial des États-Unis, beaucoup plus que sur la surveillance de la frontière. Ce matin, est-ce que vous essayez de ramener la discussion sur la frontière et comment vous faites ça tout en présentant, semble-t-il, différents scénarios au premier ministre au niveau du gouvernement, plusieurs scénarios qui seraient déployés, dont un où on serait déployé graduellement des mesures de contre-tarifs. Donc, vous tentez de ramener la discussion, si je comprends bien, à la sécurité de la frontière et comment vous faites tout ça en même temps?
Pour ramener la discussion, c'est de faire notre travail, je pense. Puis la frontière, c'est un élément immensément important pour, évidemment, le régime sortant, mais celui qui rentre. Et donc, on essaie de démontrer ce qu'on a fait depuis un tour d'horizon, c'est-à-dire de ce qu'on a fait cette dernière année, l'impact que ça a maintenant, étant donné qu'on a pris les mesures, et les mesures additionnelles qui vont se rajouter à ce qu'on a fait jusqu'à date. Donc, important de s'assurer qu'on fait notre travail. Nous, on veut aussi que les États-Unis font leur travail à la frontière. Il y a les armes à feu qui rentrent. Il y a des drogues qui rentrent au pays. On veut aussi qu'ils fassent leur travail. Puis ça va être notre message à l'administration Trump. Aussi, ça a été notre message, ça a été le message du premier ministre. Donc, on surveille les deux, nos propres responsabilités à la frontière. Donc, ramener, je ne sais pas si c'est de s'assurer que cette frontière, qui est d'une importance critique, c'est mis à part le fait que M. Trump a dit qu'il allait l'éliminer en joignant les deux pays. Puis il y a certaines personnes au Canada très peu qui veulent se rallier aux États-Unis. Ça n'arrivera pas. Mais la réalité, c'est qu'il y a plusieurs éléments sur lesquels il faut travailler. Puis être prêt à absolument tout, évidemment, les mesures, des tarifs qui vont peut-être s'imposer. Le message qu'on veut envoyer à l'administration Trump, c'est qu'on est prêt. On est prêt pour 4 ans. Et il y a une façon facile de faire les choses, puis une façon plus difficile de faire les choses. Puis on est prêt pour les deux.
Les commentaires du président élu Trump sont importants à suivre, mais soyons sérieux. Hein? C'est une question de gérer la frontière avec nos collègues aux États-Unis. La frontière est forte, si je peux utiliser le mot, est capable d'être améliorée. Il y a beaucoup de discussions, beaucoup d'entertainment qui circulent un peu à gauche et à droite. On comprend. Mais pour 41 millions de Canadiens et Canadiennes, non. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes ont des peurs, craignent les possibilités. Et c'est pourquoi on vise la mise en œuvre de notre plan. On l'ajuste. On a les ressources nécessaires. Et comme j'ai dit il y a quelques minutes, si les autres partis politiques ont des propositions, des suggestions, on veut les entendre. La frontière n'est pas partisane. C'est une question d'être sérieux, d'améliorer les choses. Mais les discussions de 51e État, comme le premier ministre Trudeau a dit, c'est pas sérieux. On est sérieux avec ce qu'on veut faire ici au Canada avec nos collègues et je pense qu'éventuellement, les gens vont bien comprendre, aux États-Unis aussi, que cette relation bilatérale qui dure depuis quand même plus que 100 ans, on gagne ensemble. Hein? On peut perdre ensemble. Et il faut, je pense, être très sérieux vis-à-vis de nos collègues aux États-Unis pour leur expliquer que c'est toujours mieux de gagner.
En suivi, M. Legault, Premier ministre du Québec, ce matin, dans une lettre ouverte, parle des produits de l'aluminium dont le prix pourrait augmenter du côté des États-Unis. Et sur l'énergie aussi, plus globalement, parmi les premiers ministres provinciaux et territoriaux, il n'y a pas de consensus actuellement sur ce qui devrait être fait avec les exportations de gaz et de pétrole. Donc, comment le gouvernement fédéral navigue au sein d'un manque de consensus?
Nous sommes une fédération. Les premiers ministres vont rencontrer le premier ministre Trudeau ce matin. Ils vont poursuivre ces discussions. C'est une question de négociation. C'est toujours la question la plus importante, c'est mettre de l'avant 41 millions de Canadiens et de Canadiennes et leur bien-être, leurs emplois, les investissements, leur sécurité. Je suis convaincu, on est convaincus, Marc et moi, que des gens de bonne foi peuvent venir ensemble pour s'entendre sur quelle mesure, quel suivi entreprendre. Et c'est une question de discussion adulte. C'est pas une question de drame. C'est une question de coopération. Et je suis convaincu, je pense que nous deux, on est convaincus que cet après-midi, ce matin et cet après-midi, on va avoir des progrès.
We go to Rafi Boudjikadjian, CBC.
Morning, thank you. My question is for both ministers. You both mentioned the importance of lack of partisanship when tackling the border issue. This morning, Jagmeet Singh has written a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau asking for all federal opposition leaders to be included in the kinds of meetings that are happening today, for example, with the premiers and the Prime Minister. Do you agree that federal opposition leaders should be part of these tables?
I may have a different view than David on partisanship. I'm not foreign to it myself at times, but I do subscribe to the fact that there is a greater purpose here in making sure that we are acting as one. We might not always be on the same wavelength, and that includes with the leader of the NDP, leader of the Bloc, or the leader of the Conservative Party. I think the message we need to provide to the Americans is that we're ready to dig in for 4 years. And there's an easy way and there's a hard way to do it, but we're ready for both. Whether a particular member of a party is entitled to be part of the meeting with premiers, I don't think so, frankly, but it's really up to the prerogative of the Prime Minister. You're a Prime Minister for a reason, and you're a Premier of a province for a reason, and people expect you to be that. They voted for you to be in that position. It doesn't necessarily always mean bringing every single person to the meeting, but those people are certainly entitled to be briefed at times, and the views of Jagmeet Singh, some of them at times have been valid, so important to listen to that as well. But should he come to every meeting? Absolutely not.
I'm convening a call almost immediately after this press conference with my colleagues who are critics for public safety to have this very discussion. I'm interested in sourcing the best ideas I can source. I think we should all be interested in getting the best ideas we can source. I think we should be looking for common ground. I've been really, really fortunate because for almost the last 8 years, I've worked with colleagues from all sides of the House in both chambers on national security and intelligence issues. I can tell you in 8 years and 15 foundation reviews, we never had to hold a single vote. Because if you have an ability of purpose and you keep focused on Canadians' interests, you can find a pathway. I think this really calls on us right now to really come together. There's a lot at stake here. As I mentioned, a lot of families right now are worried about their jobs. A lot of investors are asking questions. Transfer pricing experts are spending their time advising their clients on how easy it is to move into upper American border states, move their operations. That's not good for Canada. That's not good for our people. So if leaders of the opposition have constructive ideas to be considered to implement to improve the situation, I think we're all open to hearing. I don't know if that requires a formal structure. I haven't seen the note. I'll look at it. And I'm sure the Prime Minister will bring the same approach today. He's a very, very conciliatory person. He understands the seriousness of this moment for Canada, and he's fully seized with it.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity as a follow-up, we're seeing reports by Global News that the RCMP is acquiring Black Hawk helicopters. Is that in fact what's going on? Can you tell us?
So thank you very much. As earlier said, we have actually procured and leased 2 helicopters. The 2 models that were available and suit the capacity and the capabilities that we require are the model Black Hawk. And so 2 of those will be operational January 17th. They'll join our other fleet of helicopters, which are generally Airbuses and used for different purposes. But the current model that we selected will allow us to move members across provinces across the country, and so the addition of the 2 helicopters will give us significant coast-to-coast coverage. And so you are correct, the models are Blackhawks.
We'll go to Mary Wolfe.
Yeah, hi. This is a question for Mr. McGuinty. You talked about helicopters and drones, but you also mentioned that you're looking at increasing surveillance at the border, and I wondered if you could elaborate on that, and equally, perhaps the CBSA and RCMP could elaborate too.
If you're okay, I'd rather have the RCMP actually elaborate first. Sure. They've got more detail than I do. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Minister. And as a part of our border implementation plan, and I think it's important to reaffirm that every single day, the RCMP, the Integrated Border Enforcement Team, continues to do this work. We work in strong partnership with our colleagues at CBSA, as well as with our police of jurisdiction. So I think it's really important for Canadians to recognize that we have a significant border presence, and what we're talking about in the border implementation plan as we move forward is enhancement and augmentation. And so our plan, as we continue, as I alluded, we'll be adding 2 helicopters, which will be live and functional January 17th. We'll be increasing and adding 8 counter-drone surveillance systems across our country, which will assist in detection and in between port of entries. It will assist with our work that we do. Minister McGuinty has alluded, we're adding to our large fleet of drones, but we'll be adding 60 drones specifically for task missions tied to our integrated border enforcement work that we do across the nation. We're also adding a series of mobile land surveillance towers at strategic points across our country. And we're enhancing technology. We have 3 border integrity operation centers, and there's opportunities to enhance the technology. And so we're leveraging money in our current fiscal year to add to those components, which would significantly increase our intelligence, our ability to share information with other police services, the CBSA, as well as actually direct our investigative capacity. So that's the initial piece. And of course, we do have a continued longer plan as we look to the future. But I'll turn to my colleague.
Sure. And in terms of CBSA, the $355 million investment, a lot of that will go to surveillance at ports of entry. So detection technology, imaging, x-rays, detector dogs, satellite labs to test drugs as we detect them, as well as in the postal mode. So ours is focused on ports of entry and postal to complement the RCMP between the ports.
As a follow-up, could I ask Mr. Miller, please? You talked about a crackdown on on abuse of study permits and visas and so forth. But there are still a number of people who are not abiding by the terms of the study permits and not turning up to study. And some of them apparently are making it over the border.
See your article this morning. Right?
Yeah, yeah. But what I wondered was, is there anything else in the pipeline to maybe tighten things up so that so that people who are applying for a study permit or another visitor visa are actually doing it for legitimate purposes? And just to follow up my colleague here, on the sharing of information about permanent residents, are you concerned at all about privacy? And could you elaborate on what kind of information you're giving the United States about permanent residents, what personal information you're sharing?
It's a last question first. I'm not going to give you the full slate of elements that we are sharing with the U.S. Everyone knows constitutionally, as you cross the border, your expectation of privacy is lessened, whether you're a Canadian citizen or not. I think we do have a heightened duty towards Canadian citizens to make sure that we protect their personal information. Permanent residents have rights as well. The point here is that we found it important as a safety measure to make sure that gap was closed. It's something that the U.S. wanted, we wanted as well, so that we can make our own determinations at the border. So it is, like I said earlier, really mission critical to a safe management of the border, and that was critical in the decision making in cabinet, but also the decision to sign the agreement and put it into place, because it was, I think, a gap in some of our information sharing that we thought it was legitimate to share information on on permanent residents. Now, yes, absolutely, there is a concern about people's privacy. There are safeguards within the agreement that we believe are reasonable to safeguard people's privacy. Your first question on, I've heard from colleges and universities that, and other institutions that welcome international students, they don't want me to do a single thing more over the next little while. I've told them quite clearly that they should not expect large major changes as we look at the impact of the already major changes that we've made over the last year with respect to the international student program. This is an area that thrives on stability, but obviously what we were seeing over the course of the last few years was not acceptable. My efforts in all this have been to make sure that each institution, particularly provincial governments, but also the institutions that are welcoming these students, exercise their obligations in making sure that the students have the proper experience, make sure they pay their tuition, make sure that they get the proper education, and perhaps migrate into the workforce, perhaps even become Canadian citizens. But it's not a guarantee. It should not be the selling point. You're here to study, and that should be the basic premise. The article that you published this morning deals with data going into the early part of 2024. We think those numbers are significantly down as a result of the measures that we've taken, particularly on ensuring the solvency of people coming here, particularly in being a little more restrictive in the criteria that we impose for people to come here and study, including the cap, and making it so that it isn't what it currently had become perceived to be, which is as a backdoor way of becoming a permanent resident of Canada and not a way of studying at a legitimate institution. Is there more work to do, and are there adjustments? I would think certainly there are a few that I will be looking at over the course of the next few months to make sure that the system has even more integrity than it currently has. So I don't exclude it, but I think I owe it to the institutions and colleges, as well as the students themselves, to make sure that the measures that we're taking currently, additionally, will be a little more surgical.
Jim Brunskill, Canadian Press.
Minister McGuinty, earlier you said you were not interested in drama. Could you please elaborate on what you mean there?
I think it's important to stay focused on meaningful investments of money and time to improve the situation. And personally, my priority as the Minister of Public Safety is not to participate in dialogue which is not going to help us implement change and improvement. I'll leave that to others, but I think our political leaders in Canada now understand, and I hope they will deal with this even more forthrightly today at the First Minister's meeting, that there's a lot at risk here. And Canadians need to know that we're working on this together, and we are. That the federal government is exercising its responsibilities, and it is. And that the help we're getting from provinces and other actors, and we are, is helpful and important. That's what I mean by drama is not necessarily helpful for us. Making comments that are intemperate are not helpful for us. We need to stay focused, laser focused, on implementing the changes, reaching out to the folks we need to reach out to in order to be able to manage. Life is about relationship management, isn't it? And Canada's number one relationship, in my view, is the United States. And we need to focus very much on that. And I think we need to do that seriously and methodically and respectfully with a new government that's been duly elected, legitimate, and we have to manage our way forward. And I think that's what is best for Canadians right now. Certainly the approach to the Public Safety Department, and I know Minister Miller's approach is the same. That's what matters.
I can be a bit intemperate.
You can be a little intemperate, and I'll leave that to you. But I just think Canadians right now are counting on us to work on this for them. And I don't know if they appreciate comments that aren't helpful.
I believe $81 million of the $1.3 billion package you announced is to be spent in this fiscal year. Just for clarity, is that money being spent? And if you're able to give us a little bit of a breakdown of where it's going, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Erin?
It's being spent at CBSA. We're focused on removals, and we're working with our American counterparts and coordinating with countries that aren't always cooperative. So we're actively spending that money and proceeding on the detection equipment. So that will take, obviously, through procurement. So we're doing the homework now to be able to action quickly when it's ready.
Equally, we are actioning and spending the money in this fiscal year. Our focus has been on technology. Our focus has been on increasing our ability. The lease of the helicopters, for example, is a $5.3 million expenditure. But on top of that, when we look at drones and the counter-drone surveillance systems, the surveillance towers, and other highly specialized equipment, that's our focus, is to expedite the expenditures and the acquisition of that equipment that will help our members who are on the ground, help improve intelligence and the ongoing work that we continue to do. So we're confident, and that's where we're advancing our implementation plan around the border.
Alex Bellingwell, Toronto Star.
Thank you very much. Trump's been talking a lot about, or at least on the campaign, largest mass deportations in history. Do you guys have a sense of the magnitude of asylum claimants that could surge into Canada if he proceeds with something like that? And if this plan, the $1.3 billion plan, is sufficient to handle a potential surge from Trump's deportations?
I think that's it's answering that question would be speculative right now. We don't know yet how quickly the new administration wants to proceed on that front. We're watching it carefully. We're watching the numbers carefully. We're reaching out, and when I do, as soon as I can, sit down with the border czar, Tom Homan, I'll explore that with him after I invite him to come fishing in Canada. Apparently he loves to fish. But I know that both CBSA and the RCMP are aware and seized with this question of surge and are anticipating that and preparing for it. Do you want to add something to that?
Thank you, Mr. Minister, and I'll join my colleague, President O'Gorman, Obviously, from an emergency management perspective, a critical incident command perspective, we've been working in partnership with public safety, with all provinces, all emergency management, all police services, in particular, La Sûreté Québec and the Ontario Provincial Police. We've been doing a series of tabletop exercises that have been coordinated with our provincial counterparts and territories. And these are crucial elements and actually highlight the ongoing partnership and really the Team Canada approach to these challenges. And so they've been going remarkably well. Again, it's speculative around numbers, but I think it's important for us to recognize that we need the ability and the agility to, if there is an emergency management and or a critical incident or a crisis anywhere across our country, that we're able to mobilize. And so the RCMP is heavily focused on how do we do that, what's our operational planning, how do we move resources, and how do we support our colleagues at CBSA and other police services. And so I would say it's gone remarkably well in partnership with our provinces and our territories, and we'll continue that work, but again, working very closely with President O'Gorman.
CBSA has contingencies in place, and if the number of people that need to be processed at the ports of entry increases, we will have the capacity to do that processing. And I would just point out that the Safe Third Country remains in place, and that's an important tool for both Canada and the U.S. And as I had said previously, we're implementing it every day.
I just finalize by saying the spike that everyone anticipated seeing hasn't occurred. It's early days, but it's important to note that it hasn't occurred. We've kind of gone through this roller coaster of discussing the potential massive and, as David said, speculative flow of people that would come to Canada as a result of the new administration, and within weeks talking about what the new administration itself was saying, which is the southbound travel, and that's occupied a lot of our thoughts since then. This is going to be a roller coaster, probably in the public mind. We need to be able to deal with both when and if they occur. I think both sides of the border have to work diligently to make sure that they do not occur. Our southbound flow that we've cut to historic lows in December is a significant gain. They need to make sure that any migration that may occur in an unplanned way to Canada doesn't occur. Those folks are not welcome to Canada if they are doing so in an irregular fashion. And any way and any migration that is controlled has to be done in a way that has Canada at the table with the U.S. We've been able to demonstrate with the current administration our ability to relocate about 15,000 people from the Americas by working together. And I don't want to speculate, but you can imagine someone that takes their life into their own hand, fleeing whatever they are fleeing, going through the Darien Gap up through Mexico up into the U.S. If they suddenly feel pressured to leave to Canada, I don't think that border is going to deter them from going back. So if they want to do this the right way, they need to work with us. If they don't, it won't be as successful as they think it needs to be. So that is over and above the mass deployment of capital and resources needed to do something in the proper way. That means it will take time if it's done properly. But again, we are prepared for everything, and it would be too early to speculate what those numbers would be.
And just as a follow-up for Minister McGuinty, I think in your opening remarks, I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying. There's an aim to increase removals by 25% this year. Can you just explain to me what that is exactly, and what a removal is, and what you're talking about there?
Erin?
Sure. So as the minister said, last year CBSA executed about a little over 16,000 removals, the most in a decade. And so when people have gone through the process of the Immigration and Refugee Board, have availed themselves of appeals, and have been determined not to have status in Canada, then the expectation is they leave. And a lot of people leave. Some people choose not to leave. CBSA finds them, and we assist with their departure.
I have been told this was the last question, but I wonder, and you've been generous enough, but I just wonder if there's one network left who didn't get to have a question. Do you mind staying on for like
Depends on the network.
Quick question? It's Mercedes Stevenson, Global News.
Of course.
At this. Thanks so much for being so patient and taking all of our questions. I have two, one for Minister McGuinty and one for Minister Miller. Minister McGuinty, you mentioned passing the legislation that would back the money for this. It is your Prime Minister who prorogued Parliament. We all know there's likely to be an election before there's a chance to pass any of this legislation. Can you speak at all to any reassurances to the Canadian people that this money is still going to flow for the promises that have been made, or is it tied up to that specific piece of legislation? And if you could kind of outline what that process might look like to ensure the funds are still available to security agencies.
What I've assured myself of since arriving only 3 weeks ago is that the current circumstances around prorogation will not affect the implementation of our border plan. Been reassured repeatedly by departments and agencies that reallocations are taking place, folks are being deployed. We have the resources to implement the plan. There may be some additional legislative measures that would be helpful and required. And again, I think it's important for all of us to down the partisanship. And if we have to come together in order to pass legislation to be able to deal with this really important situation, I think people of good faith and goodwill can do that. It's true, we prorogue Parliament. It's true that we're holding a leadership convention, but this is a mature democracy, and we can do both. We can deal with this, and the Government of Canada is seized with this right now, and we are seized with this, and the Canada-U.S. Committee of Cabinet is seized with this. So, hope for me springs eternal. If we have to come back together, I think people of goodwill and good faith should be able to do that. Because right now, I don't think it's as much about our partisan gain as it is about 41 million people who are quite worried. And if we put that in the window and on our dashboard, if that's our purpose, I'm convinced we can come together, pass the legislation that we need, and if we need to move further on monies, I think we can do that as well. This is just one of those moments where it's too important not to. So I remain hopeful. We'll see what happens this afternoon with the First Ministers. The Prime Minister is working very hard on this to be able to gain the trust and support. And so it's still an open question.
Part of its future, but I'm sure part of it falls under your file too, Minister McGuinty. When it comes to removals of people who have not only perhaps stayed beyond when they were welcome or the ruling of the IRB, but those who lied on applications to get in, I'm thinking in particular of some high-profile terrorism cases. Speaking to experts who study the CBSA and immigration enforcement in Canada, they've said that, well, the numbers have gone up exponentially over the last year. There still is not enough capacity to deal with the kind of surge that we could be seeing in light of the new measures you're bringing in. Are you looking at increasing the size and resources of the inland enforcement abilities of the CBSA?
And my concern on this, to the point you raised with David, is some of the legislative sort of sclerosis that we've been in the last. It's not because of one of the reasons for prorogation was because of the state of affairs currently in this Parliament, where Conservatives have been monkeying around since the resumption of the House in the fall. And even before then, I proposed asylum reform in the last budgetary cycle. It got ripped out and smoked at committee. So this is something that doesn't go back to yesterday or a simple moment in time where the Prime Minister, I think, responsibly decided to prorogue for the sake of stability of the country. This goes back to a year ago, and people playing games. This isn't new. This capacity of the Immigration Refugee Board to keep up has not been what it should be. It has been able to get more resources through various budgetary cycles to increase its capacity and I think increase efficiency. This is really a crown jewel worldwide of the refugee system globally and how we process things in a nonpartisan way. Other countries that we compare ourselves to do it in a more arbitrary way. So it's something to be quite proud of, but it hasn't been able to keep up, to your point. And despite historic removals of folks, it can take a long time. And some people will game that system, and some people will just remain in that system through no bad faith, but because they're simply waiting. And there's got to be a way to bridge that gap. It's only going to get worse until it gets better. There are legislative elements that I had proposed with respect to, for example, the potential of people coming in and skirting around the 14-day rule in the Safe Third Country Agreement. That would have required legislative changes. Elements around mass cancellations of visas that we want to use to align ourselves to some of the tools that the U.S. has. I think it's important when you think of a North American perimeter. But those will not be able to be done unless we get back to Parliament and vote through a more aggressive package of asylum reform, which I think allows Canada to live up to its reputation of being a country that follows the rule of law, but does have to deal with efficiency gains as well as capacity needs for an overstretched immigration refugee board. And I'm not going to blame the people that process cases. They are working really hard, but you can't just throw bodies at the challenge. You have to actually make some changes, and that includes making changes within the way CBSA processes as well.
This puts an end to this press conference. Merci beaucoup pour votre
Minister
grande
McGuinty, are you
flexibilité.
running again?
Of course.
You are. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not for leadership.
Bonne journée.
Yeah, jointly.